All right, our last presenter, but certainly not our least, is, and she is, let's see, right there. Oh, sorry, okay. Is Danielle Bilot. And she's going to talk about something that I think a lot of people have an interest in, and I'll be surprised if this YouTube video doesn't get a lot of hits. One of our biggest problems right now, obviously, is decline of pollinator populations. Impacts our ability to grow food, impacts the food chains, and so it's got a lot of a crossover effect. And she's going to talk a little bit about retrofitting gray spaces to pollinator habitats. I'm very excited about that. Let me just tell you a little bit about Danielle. She received her Bachelor of Landscape Architecture from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and her Master's of Landscape Architecture from the University of Oregon. Her pollinator work has been published both in international print and on professional websites. She has also worked with ASLA and the White House on their pollinator action plan that was released this past June. She's a strong advocate for pollinators as well as improving urban active transit options, which is why she bikes both as a commuter and for leisure. We're very excited to have Danielle Bilot.
All right, I'm going to figure out how to work this thing.
Yeah, sorry about
Exit.
that.
You close this out?
Yeah, close that out. You
I
should
put
be-
it in.
There you go. Perfect. You know it.
Honey, grab my phone up there, would you? See it?
Oh, okay.
Those are clutch. All right, good afternoon, everyone. So I want to start out with a couple of little anecdotes. Out in Denver, there is an advocacy group that recently changed a bunch of their non-working, non-functional parking meters into donation banks for homeless shelters in the area and their programs that they support. In Switzerland, a group developed a product called Life Straw that some of you actually got in your bags if you're a sponsor. That is a cheap, effective tool for helping to provide clean water to developing countries and for us backpackers that really can't find a good source very quickly. And then over in Los Angeles, Elon Musk just unveiled Tesla's new power battery. And that can change our reliance on fossil fuels in general, as well as our overall connection to the grid. Change. It happens when we combine our passions with our creative genius and advocate for what we believe in. All the things that I just mentioned, the donation banks, the Life Straw, and the Powerwall battery, all stem from the same mission: create passionate change. For me, my biggest passion is food. I went to grad school knowing one main thing: I love food. There is nothing better than going out on a hot summer's day, especially here in Texas. Being from Wisconsin, some of my analogies might be a little weird, like referencing snow. But hot damn if I don't love a good watermelon, or going out for happy hour and going sit on the patio and eating some guac and chips and sipping on a margarita. But unfortunately, all of those things may be a thing of the past if we don't rehabilitate our bee populations, and quickly. Bees are responsible for the majority of crops out there and for the pollination of a lot of our landscape plants as well, but they are in severe decline. And the top two reasons being our unbridled use of chemicals and the lack of suitable habitat year-round for them. We could get into a long discussion about chemicals, but I'm pretty sure we'd be preaching to the choir for this one. I was just looking at an article that was titled 37 million bees lost in Ontario, Canada today that were at a GM corn agriculture site. So we all know that they suck. But so that's not the focus of this presentation today. It's going to be about creating food, water, and shelter sources for these bees, because without that, they cannot and will not survive. No animal could. Us humans couldn't either. But it's lucky that we can change this, and with the help of a kind of unlikely ally, too. My name is Danielle Bilot, and I'm going to show you today how by simply changing our park and parking lot plants that we can save the majority of local urban pollinator species, especially native bees, and help conserve the composition of both of our landscapes and our dinner plates. So I'm going to talk about three things. One, I'm going to try and convince you why native bees are the best bees for this job. That any habitat, whether it's urban or rural, can be transformed into an effective pollinator habitat. And I'm going to use Houston, Texas even as a case study for this and apply those principles as well to some agricultural lands. And then go into some implications and applications for this. Whether you are a homeowner or a high-up government official, there are all ways that we can be making a difference to help build appropriate pollinator habitat. So we're going to start with the first one. Native bees are the right guys for the job. In the US, the non-native honeybee is mostly relied upon for pollination, especially for crops, but they've suffered severe setbacks in recent years. Over the past roughly 58 years, domestic honeybee stocks have declined by 58% in the US alone. This is like 100 million years of evolution that could be gone in 100 years of our lifetime. This is not okay. This is a rapid, rapid decline. And the fact that there's a lack of diversity in commercial pollinators makes it easy for these landscape systems to fail. It's kind of like how we rely upon one main energy source for our energy grid. If that energy source fails, so do a lot of other systems with it. So we can't allow this pollination system to fail. But luckily, the future of US food and plant supplies do not have to rely upon just honeybees. Native bees come in all sorts of shapes, colors, and textures, just like the plants that they pollinate. They support diversity and have diversity within them, because while there is only one species of honeybee, there are over 4,000 native species of native bees in the US. And each one of them is different in their applications and characteristics and specializations. So diversity, attracting diversity is kind of a theme I want to promote here. Overall, there's three main characteristics that I think make these native bees the perfect guys to help buffer the pollination deficit left by dwindling honeybee stocks. And the first one is safety. You ask a kindergartner, you say the word bee, and you say the first thing that comes to mind, and it's either stinging or honey. But most of the contemporary stereotypes that people think about bees are actually derived from honeybees or wasps or yellow jackets, not native bees. In fact, only about 2% of native bees actually sting, while 95% of honeybees sting. Only the drones don't. The reason behind this lies in their sociality. Honeybees are social, and they are intrinsically tuned to protect their hive, so that's why they sting. They have something to protect. They have a goal to work towards and are in a community situation. But since most native bees aren't social, they don't really feel the need to sting, unless you go, digging through their home, in which case I would sting you too. The second is efficiency. Since honeybees are heavily relied upon for pollination, you might assume that they're the most efficient ones out there, but actually that's also not true. Their goal is not pollination, it's to support the hive, and so that's what makes them a little bit different. Many native bee species are more effective at pollination on a bee-for-bee basis than honeybees. Honeybees operate at roughly a 72% efficiency rate, while native bees operate at about a 91% efficiency rate. And in some cases, just over 200 native bees can provide the same pollination services as a hive of honeybees that contain over 10,000 workers. And it's been proved that having native bees in the same spot as honeybees increases productivity and competition among them. So there's actually more pollination being done. Okay, that guy over there is doing a better job, so I can't look worse than him. I think we can all relate to the competition among them. And then third is cost. Honeybee hives go through such a long, arduous process to get from one space to another. You're in Florida for 2 weeks pollinating some orange fields over there, and then they truck you across the country to California to pollinate that almond crop for a couple weeks, all while feeding you just like sugar-based substitutes and these pollen cakes. And it's basically what you would do, or what it would be for humans, is like eating Twinkies and taking a multivitamin for weeks on end. That is not sustainable, and no wonder they're so sick. Twinkies will kill, by the way. In the end, it costs about $200 per hive to rent for every week. And California's almond crop in 1 year spent $292 million on pollination services. What else could we do with that money? We could send about 8,000, 10,000 students to college for free for 4 years completely. We could get about 163 million school lunches for underprivileged kids. I think the list goes on and on. There's a lot better things that we could be doing with that money. But so if they're this great, why aren't we really using them already? And there's 2 reasons. One, cash money. We can attach a $ to honeybees' ecosystem services because they live in a hive and are portable. But native bees, they don't live in hives, which we'll go into a little bit later. But where they live, they'll do their pollination work, and they can jump within the site as well. So you save a bunch of money. It's marginal, what you would have to spend for them. It's just providing year-round food and some bare ground. And it helps cut the middleman out of your expenditures and allow native bees to regain control of their health. And 2, there is a big gap of knowledge about native bees, but about pollinators in general, that hasn't been discussed fully. We understand a lot of the site characteristics that are necessary to have all of these bees survive, but what we're not really talking about is the distribution necessary for these habitat spaces, because otherwise we are going to create population sinks. If you had only one restaurant in a whole mile area that you lived in and you only had your feet to use, you'd probably go there a lot. But what if that restaurant went out of business? Where would you go? And so that's kind of the situation that we're creating here. If you look at the picture, it's showing, you have one pollination field, like say in the egglands, but they can only fly so far before they need a new food source. But since there's these huge monoculture fields out there, they exhaust all of their efforts. And so a lot of them die en route to finding more food. But what I'm proposing with these parks and parking lots is to create stepping stone habitats that will help these pollinators bisect the city instead of avoiding them. So now that we know a little bit more about native bees, here's a kind of like a 3-step process that I've created to go through to help implement these, to help establish urban pollinator habitat in different cities. So the first step is to know your bees. It was surprising in grad school how difficult it was to find information about local native bee species. The research hasn't been kept up with a lot, and so I had to pull from different sources, and that's a start. And then once you get the species list together, you need a couple key characteristics about them. You need their body size, because that will directly relate to how far they can fly before they need another habitat source. And then you need to know what food they like and where they like to live. So the first 2 relate to the distribution of it, the species and the body size. So my test case for my thesis was Houston, Texas, and I first thought of it because I figured if I could fix Houston, I could fix anywhere. I went to school at the University of Oregon, a little hippie mecca, as they like to call it down here, apparently. And they are doing a lot of very progressive things up there. But there's a lot of potential here in Houston, and we should manifest that. So this diagram that I created kind of shows on the bottom scale the relative size, the body sizes of the local native bee species that I found for here, and then how far they can fly before they need a new food source. And so the margin of error is roughly like 1 to 2 blocks, because what they have to do is attach like this little sticky dot on the back of them, and it weighs them down a little bit, because if you got something that weighs, 3 grams, you add a gram to it, that's a a third of its body weight, so it can't fly nearly as far. So I created these categories that can help us look at the different species and where they fall into. So as far as Houston species go, this is kind of the rough proportions that fall into each of those categories. So it's relatively well distributed with a high impact in the middle, kind of what it should look like, a crown. And then after the distribution part of it, we got to know how to build this site, right? And so the two most important characteristics when you're designing a site are the nesting and the foraging habits of the bees that you're trying to help. So referring to nesting, there are two types of nesters, ground and wood nesters, or softwood mostly. They don't live in hives. They live in the ground and in wood, which was a huge, huge thing to stumble upon. I wasn't a bee expert at all when I first started, and so understanding that they don't live in hives was something that I had to kind of grasp. And that's what made me think that these native bees are the right ones for the job too, because we have a lot of bare soil areas here on the ground. I like to keep the honeybees kind of up on the roofs, away from people, and pollinate the rooftop habitats, and they can still go up and down, but these native bees live great on the ground, and they can coexist with us a lot. So roughly, overall, it's like a 1 in 4 habitat space that should be from wood to ground nesters. There's a significant more amount of ground nesters than there are wood nesters, and so that's what we really need to get across. And they need bare ground, not mulched ground. Mulched ground to them is kind of like when you exit a door and see 2 feet of snow out there and you're trying to get out. Well, okay, maybe you guys don't really know about that, but in the north, that happens all the time. And so they can't find their habitat space through mulch. So this literally needs to be bare ground. And you see these fancy bee boxes everywhere. Yes, those are great, and they promote more education than anything, but these pre-drilled holes also are kind of an invitation for parasitic bees to come and take root too. So if you leave just like a piece of dead wood in there, they'll make their own holes that fit their specific body size and not any other parasitic ones. For foraging, they need food year-round. They need food for they need stuff for nesting, and they need stuff to eat. And so right now, on the allowable list of parking lot plants for Houston, there are no plants that provide nesting materials or foraging materials for these bees, or really any pollinators in general. It's just a list of 20 plants. So we need to also use a lot of native species, but some non-native too, because as the landscape has developed, so have the species that reside here as well. And so they've adapted with some of these more non-native flowering species that we have around here too. So getting a variety of things, knowing your bees, knowing if they're specialists. So if there's a squash bee, you know it's only going to pollinate different squash plants. But then there's a bunch of generalists like bumblebees that kind of a little bit more slutty in their pollination techniques. They'll go and eat anything really. So variety here is key. And so overall, we got nesting and we got foraging on the site. So a little recap, roughly 75% of your nesting area should be dedicated to ground nesters and 25% dedicated to wood nesters. And for foraging, we need a variety of year-round food for all of your different varieties of species that reside here. And each one should take up a decent amount of area too. They don't see, when they're trying to fly to the next habitat site, they don't see one plant very easily. They either need to see or smell their food before they reach it. And so if they can't smell it through the fog and the daily activities that happen in downtown Houston or something, they need to be able to see it. And so by planting swaths of them of roughly at least 15 to 18 square feet areas, it'll make it a lot easier for them to see. So once you have the site, you're like, okay, I know I need nesting, I know I need foraging or whatever, but the overall site composition is also key. There should be, again, much more foraging than nesting opportunities, because a lot of them are going to use this as a rest stop, like a trucker would. So providing more food for them along the way is key, but also keeping about 20% nesting. So now I'm going to kind of look at Houston, Texas, and how would we actually apply these principles to these parks and parking lots here. It's my little abstract diagram of what I think Houston is. So I took a little like 1.5 mile area in downtown, and it looks like this. So first I outlined the park spaces that were within the 1.5 mile area in green, and then in gray you can kind of see that I outlined the parking lot spaces as well. So the first and easiest way to create pollinator habitat is just to add some different plants to your parks. So I looked here and said, okay, so that really, really large native bee that can fly, up to 900 meters before it needs some food. The circles are 900 meters in diameter. So if they touch or they overlap, that means that they are likely to be able to reach the next food source. So at first, I just put these habitat spaces in the parks, and it looks like great. This category of bee species could get to all these habitat spaces if we just retrofitted our parks a little bit. But what happens when we look at smaller bees? The second smaller category, the large category, you see 2 new green dots that we had to add in parking lot spaces because there would have been gaps between the bubbles. They couldn't fly far enough to those parks in order to reach them. So we need to create these stepping stone habitats, and one way to do that is parking lots. So if we did this strategy, and also all the lots I'm going to use here are municipally owned, so not a terrible amount of legislative change that needs to happen either. I would like to see personally all parking lot standards changed, but even if our city can just do this, it'll make a big difference. And then we look at the medium native bees. This one we didn't actually have to add any new additional habitat spaces for. And we can accomplish this for 67% of our local native bee species. And then with the small category, you see we needed to add 2 new habitat spaces within parking lots. And that would accomplish 88%. And then we get to the really, really small guys, the really, really specialists usually. And you can see a lot of yellow dots. We had to add a lot of yellow dots to suffice for their different species, what they need for distribution. But the goal was to see if, I could create a ring around this whole 1.5 mile area to say, okay, if native bees only resided here, we could save them all, and they could make a complete loop throughout the year. And here we couldn't do it, but as you can see, there's a lot of connectivity happening that will connect to other areas in the city. And Houston has 18% of their land use dedicated to surface parking lots. Every urban area has at least 10%. So this is a relatively feasible option for every urban area, especially Houston. Why not add another purpose to them? They hold a lot of potential, but we're not utilizing them enough. So this is a little bit of, let me see if I have that. No, I didn't. This is a little area in downtown Houston. Some of you might recognize it. And in Houston, there are regulations where you have to have a hedgerow or a double hedgerow of shrubs around the edge for screening reasons. And so I took the parking lots that I saw here, I outlined what their buffer space would be, and looking at this, you can see that the nesting is in brown and the foraging is in green. And so within each parking lot site, we maintain those proportions of both 20% being nesting sites and about 80% being foraging. And within those nesting and foraging sites, don't forget we have to further break it down. Ground and wood nesters, specialists, and generalists for foraging. There's just a little zoomed in so we can see the highlighted portions of it. So the nesting has 20, and the foraging as the majority. It's the current parking lot, but this is what it could look like. This doesn't cost the city or anyone any money. All we're asking is to change your list of allowable parking lot plans. It may be the cheapest, easiest solution that there is. Look at how much fun those kids are having. They're having a great time. Look at that blue bee. And you can see here too how there's swaths of plants, not single plants. And there's also additional strategies that you can add to these sites, like adding boulders to help maintain the heat that they need for reproduction. Not necessarily that we need that here in Texas. I think we have enough heat. But in other places of the country, that's necessary. We could add fruiting trees to there because A, who doesn't love a free snack? And B, it provides a lot of pollen and nectar benefits for them. This is a little section of what I think actually is kind of a missed opportunity for us. It's a light rail corridor downtown. When I looked at this and I saw green, I'm like, oh my gosh, no, this is a highlight of our city. We're actually implementing some type of mass transit here. Like, let's make this a focal piece, and we made it green. But this is what it should look like. This is what it could look like. It's not any more expensive. Just change your plants. And then I also told you that there would be a couple implications for rural lands as well. Currently, a lot of grants or tax cuts or whatever are given to big agricultural lands that convert a percentage of their habitat or of their croplands to habitat for pollinators. But it only gives a percentage. It doesn't give a distribution for that percentage. So that bee's in the middle. You got 2 miles down there. It can't reach the next food source. So once it runs out in the middle, where are they going to go? Instead, we should be focusing on efforts more like this that provide habitat spaces along the way that they can jump to. And it still makes it, we still have to work with farmers on this, to make sure that all of their tractors and everything can get in between, but this looks a lot better. And finally, so cool idea maybe, but how do we actually start implementing this besides working to change our parking lot standard plants? So as I just discussed, most grants or tax cuts are given when a percentage of land is converted to pollinator habitat, but we need to look at the distribution of that habitat more so and include that as a clause. Also, we can promote edible easements, which there are a bunch of in the Pacific Northwest. It is my favorite walk to take. Their invasive plant is blackberry. Not a big deal. It is a wonderful summer up there. There's blackberry pie, and there's plums hanging over the right-of-way, and orange trees being planted, and cherry trees in the park, and it's a little oasis, and we can have that here. And another thing is with our rating systems. So for those of you that don't know, LEED is a rating system, a sustainability standard system for buildings, and sites is a sustainability standard system for landscapes, both of which now have gone under the management of the U.S. Green Building Council. So we can offer changes to both of these systems easier. Right now, there are 0 points that you can get on either rating system for implementing pollinator habitat. They just, now with LEED, just finally came out with a pilot point for urban farming efforts. 1 point. 1 point out of like the 93 you need to get to silver or something, whatever it is. So clearly that's not enough. But don't worry, you can get up to 8 points for using rubberized mulch in the landscape, because we all know that that's a winner. Not even a little bit. So we have efforts like LEED and sites or net zero energy or net zero water initiatives. Why not net zero pollination? While animals may need bigger continuous swaths of habitat to thrive, it's not necessarily the same for insects that are also crucial to our survival. Just because some green spaces or potential green spaces might be fragmented, they still hold potential, and we can still use them to create this wildlife corridor habitat that bisects cities instead of avoids them. Sometimes it's the little ones that you don't hear that pack the biggest punch too. And finally, the biggest one is education. Unless we take down contemporary stereotypes against bees, unless we change our standards to support the creation of diverse landscapes and not monocultures, and until we realize that this bee problem, it's not just a problem for entomologists or planners or anything, it's all of our problems. None of this will work. So what can we do? There's obviously a bunch of different urban garden efforts in schools and in a variety of communities that are thriving. I see one of them back there. Hello, Justin. There are ways that you can do just yourself, like Writing and advocacy efforts. I just wrote an article for our professional website on what is and isn't being done nationally and locally to save pollinators. Because the more that you advocate for what you believe in, the more you're going to realize that other people have that voice too. And then your voice is only going to get louder. We also need to stop requesting and start requiring. And that's what I'm talking about with retrofitting these different systems like LEED and sites and things like that. We have foregone diversity in the landscape for the ease of maintenance and permitting so quickly. We also need to value our maintenance staff. Why isn't that a skilled profession like masonry or woodworking or anything like that? We need to place value where value should be placed. And also, one of the biggest challenges that I've had recently is about the aesthetics of it. So pollinator habitat goes through cycles. It's green one day, and then it becomes lush and purple with flowers, and then it kind of starts to brown out, gets cut back, and then it comes back. But everyone wants everything to be green and lush all the time, which is unrealistic. I mean, we all go through the same cycles. Sometimes we look like we dress to the nines and we're going to the Met Ball, and sometimes we're binge watching Netflix in our pajamas eating 2 pounds of potatoes. So we should be a little bit less quick to judge. I want to leave you with a quote from one of my favorite shows. It's from Parks and Rec, and it says, "Never half-ass 2 things, whole-ass 1 thing." Because I truly believe that if you follow your passion, where it takes you, you can't go wrong. But go for it, because you can do it. Thank you. Actually, I want to leave that up. I was going to move it. All right, questions? Yes.
Is there anything, you showed downtown Houston and how the circles could cross and everything, but is there anything like air pollution or other things that would interfere with bees being able to get to places?
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of getting at, where I was talking about the swaths that we have to plant these plants in, because either they need to see or they need to smell their next food source. And so, yeah, pollution can get in the way, but if we just change our parking lot standard plants, there's so many parking lots here that they will be able to see their next food source and get to it. But I even looked into, I went as specific as looking into if the vibrations in the city would affect their reproductive habits, and they don't. They don't. They're fine. Yes?
So the city of Houston has their preferred or their required plant list. To be able to use other plant material, used to have to go to get a permit to do that. Is that still the case?
Well, it's technically yes, but no. There is one man doing the review process, and he has a lot on his plate, so either it's on the list or it's not. And so that's a big deterrent for people to do it, because why should you even have to go through that whole extra process to provide something that is not only beneficial ecologically, but also, if their main goal with putting these hedgerows around parking lots is for screening, they're not actually even doing the job, because what our eye goes to is what's different. And so what's different in that scenario is the cars behind it. It's the colors, it's the shapes, it's the heights. But if we change the plants in front of it to be the diversity in the situation, that's what our eyes will look at more so. And we'll stop thinking of it as a place for cars, and more of as a place for people too. Yes, both.
Great idea, using the city parking lots, but don't they use like pesticides and stuff for their?
Actually, Houston's relatively progressive in that respect. I was surprised to find out, with the parks maintenance staff, what they do and don't use. But I'm not saying that's true for all cities, And until someone like you cares a whole lot, nothing's going to change. It's really not. So either the citizens have to want it at the end of the day, I can go to meetings and talk to, or really try and force meetings on the planning department. If there's anyone here, we should talk afterwards. But advocacy is huge because it's the voices in the community that really matter.
Where are you in the process with the city? Or where are we in the process with the city?
Yelling. I have had a really, really welcome reception from different management districts and things like that. But getting the city to change or to even hear about change has been rather difficult. I actually even had a meeting with the mayor's, his name is James Koski. I forgot what he is to her. But in that meeting, he was all for it. He's like, don't worry, we'll issue an executive order for next year saying that we really want to push for pollinator habitat because what executive orders come out is really what's going to be pushed for and funded for the next year. And so I heard that. That was 13 months ago, and we haven't seen it. So I'm starting to put pressure on them in other ways. I'm talking to the Houston Chronicle, hopefully working on an article with them. So using the media sources, harnessing the media and the community is really where I'm at right now. Because I'm still going to keep plugging in and sending them emails that we should meet.
Have you talked to Pat Walsh with Planning and Development?
I haven't talked to any, I've only talked to, there are 2 people in there and I have their emails, but probably not, and I would like their contact.
He's the director. and
No, I don't think I was even
I
emailing
think
him.
he would be very receptive.
I like your theories. Yes.
Have a recommended plant list for
Yes.
natives?
Yes, so this all derived from my compendium 90-page thesis, which I was not about to put up there. But yeah, there is a list, and since my test case was Houston, there's a list already created, and I've talked with the Parks Department too about what plants are commercially available, which ones work the best here, and working with different partnerships so that we can refine this list even more. Anybody else?
Is it available to us? Or are you holding it?
For press.
You can give me your information, and once, I'm probably more likely to send out the full one when we get something adopted here in Houston. But I do have like an example one that I could send out at least, that shows the chart and everything. All right, thank you guys very much.